today we've got Kelly Berry. She is a expert market researcher. I've had the pleasure of working with her via my role at HCDC in helping businesses tap into strategic growth research. She's got a great background with an organization called the National Center for Economic Gardening, but also with, and she's taught courses within the University of Wisconsin kind of consortium of schools. And then she is an entrepreneur just like you, in that she runs her own business as well. So I'll turn it over to Kelly and let her provide an even further introduction on the topic. She's got a set of slides that she'll share. And I've dropped into the chat a worksheet that you can potentially leverage if you see fit to take notes on, whether it's after the session and refer to kind of during the session, that can help you kind of like crystallize a lot of the things that she'll share today. So for all of you, it looks like everyone's on mute. So if you have any questions, feel free to just ping the chat, and I'll be the moderator and make sure Kelly can address the question at the right point in time. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kelly.
All right, thanks, Paul. I'm going to share my screen as we get started here. And let's see. Can you see my slide there okay? All right. So there's a loving mother on the front slide here. And so the topic is don't ask your mom how to validate your idea through market research. And so we'll talk about some ways to do some customer validation. Here's a little outline of what you can expect today. So we'll just do a brief introduction. I'd like to get a sense for where you all are in the process of your business plan. And then part one will be more of a focus on secondary research. What can you learn that already exists out there to help you further advance your business? And then part two is more about individual customer interviews, or learning more information through that interview process and how to go about doing it in a way that can be the most beneficial for you. And then there'll be time at the end for questions, but certainly if you have questions along the way and you stick them in the chat, I'll address them if it seems like the right time to do that. So Paul already introduced me. I'll just give you a brief introduction of myself and some of my background. I actually grew up in New Jersey, graduated from college there, got my degree in applied math with a business minor. So I spent my first several jobs doing statistical data analysis for decision-making, got my MBA, I moved to Wisconsin, got my MBA there, taught a class called Applied Quantitative Methods for 4 or 5 years, got sick of that, started my own business, and have been running that ever since about 2005. I have 2 kids, but my husband and I are empty nesters. My husband also owns his own business. I have taught off and on for the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire, and also for the University of Wisconsin online MBA consortium, including classes on market research, new venture feasibility, feasibility studies, and for the MBA program, a class called Developing New Products and Services. So I spend a lot of time in a startup world. And when I'm not in that world, I spend a lot of time doing market research for second stage businesses, helping them to find new customers, new industries, new markets to get into. I also run CEO peer groups for business owners of those second stage businesses, which we typically identify as those with between 1 and 50 million in annual revenue. And so I've got 2 groups running right now in the state of Wisconsin, and I'm working to expand that as well. And then I just recently launched a new business called Learn, Start, Grow, which is really devoted to helping small businesses grow in whatever way is the right one for them. So ultimately, it will be a resource for workshops, courses, guest speakers, discussions, and that sort of thing. So I'm kind of just working on that on the side right now. So that's, I don't need to go into any more detail there, but my passion is working with small businesses and working with startups, and I just really love doing that. So I'm excited to be here today to do this with you. So what I'd like to get a sense from all of you now, if you can just drop in the chat where you are in the process. So I kind of break it into learn, start, and grow, where learn is I'm just starting to explore what's involved. I have maybe an idea, but I haven't gotten very far. So, if you're in that stage, just stick learn in the chat. Start is I'm started things. I'm kind of figuring it out on the fly as I get my business going. So you can stick that in the chat as well. And then grow is you've already got your business up and running and you're just working to grow your business. So that helps me get a sense for, where everybody is in the process. And I see a variety. I see some grows and a start and between start and grow and start. Okay. So that's great. So if you're already got your business up and running, certainly it always helps to do some customer validation kind of as an ongoing basis. But if you're still figuring things out, then it becomes even more important. So I want to introduce this topic with a little case study that comes from Clayton Christensen. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a famous business professor and consultant who wrote the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, which a lot of people think is just a classic for entrepreneurs to read. So he referred to customer validation as understanding the job that your product or service is doing for your customers. What job do you solve for them? And he gave an example one time that he was hired by McDonald's to figure out how they could sell more milkshakes. So McDonald's, and this was a while back before we had massive amounts of data that we could collect, but McDonald's, still as a big company, was able to collect a lot of data about their customers and their purchases and when they made purchases and how many people and so forth. But what they can't collect, and even today it's hard to collect this easily, is why? Why did they make these purchases? So as they looked at their data, they noticed that the majority of the purchases were made early in the morning from 6 a.m. to about 10 a.m. And for most people, it was a drive-up purchase and it was their only purchase. They're just driving up, buying one milkshake and leaving. So the folks at McDonald's wanted to know, why are these people buying a single milkshake as a drive-up in the morning? What is it, if we want to try to promote milkshakes, what's the right messaging or who are the right people to get in front of to better understand that process? And so Clayton Christensen and his team of researchers actually went to a bunch of McDonald's and stood by that drive up and they asked people, hey, excuse me, I noticed you just bought a milkshake. Can you tell me what job is that milkshake doing for you? How, why did you choose to purchase this milkshake? And so those milkshake drinkers started explaining, well, I have a long drive to work and I get tired and I get hungry. So I started out by buying donuts to eat on my drive, but I can never eat just one. And I know they're not good for me. So other people, I tried a bagel, but it's so dry, it needs cream cheese. Have you ever tried to spread cream cheese on a bagel while you're driving? It just doesn't work. Another person, one time I tried a Snickers bar, but I felt so guilty eating candy for breakfast that I just couldn't do it again. I tried a banana, but it's hard to peel a banana when you're driving and it doesn't last very long. And I get hungry again before I get to work. So then someone said, well, now a milkshake, that does the job. I can eat it with one hand. It takes me nearly 30 minutes to finish it because it's so thick to begin with. I end up feeling full enough when I get to work that I don't need a snack. So the job the milkshake was performing was giving them the chance to eat something on the go that they felt was satisfying and relatively healthy, perhaps compared to a donut or a candy bar. Easy, process. So understanding the job that the milkshake was doing for these customers then can help McDonald's connect to those people and have the right messaging. And it was something that it hadn't occurred to them that was why people were buying this milkshake, whether it was truck drivers or people with a long commute. This was an important piece of information that they uncovered, but only because they asked the right people the right questions. So that's really the goal in customer validation, is to ask the right people the right questions. So there are really two times when you should gather customer information. First is before you start your business or begin to offer your new product or service. And the second time is all the rest of the time you're in business. Customer validation isn't something that should just start your process. It should be ongoing. You should constantly be doing some customer validation because you want to always be learning what your customers like and don't like. You want to make sure that you are in touch with them. And that's one area that I have seen small businesses sometimes kind of fall off with the customer validation is after they've already started their business. So bear in mind, for those of you that are in the grow stage, that certainly I recommend continually be working to answer. Oops.
Hey, Kelly.
Yes.
So I love that McDonald's story. And for those of you like who haven't, aren't familiar with Jobs to Be Done and Clayton Christensen, it's a really good, I mean, there's whole books on it, right?
Yeah.
On how to think about jobs. One thing I remember about the story that I'd love to get your thoughts on, if you remember it the same way, is that like, didn't McDonald's look back at like all the data and just continuously look at the data initially and try and like make new flavors of milkshakes and all sorts of other things, and like it didn't move the needle on their sales, if memory serves me right. And it wasn't until they actually spent like 18 hours at the McDonald's doing like ethnographic research.
Yep.
So they actually figured out that job. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, it was something like that. Because, I think a lot of people think, well, as I collect the data, I know exactly what's going on. And I think you're right that they were looking at, well, what are other ways? Should we make, yogurt shakes, or should we add new flavors, or what should we do to get more people to buy the milkshakes? And I actually just dropped in the chat a link to a YouTube video where I think it's actually Clayton Christensen explaining this story. So if you're curious to see that further, I'm just kind of summarizing it here because I think it does such a great job of explaining why the why question is so important. And that's one that's really hard to capture with just raw data. You actually need to talk to people to understand why they're making those choices. And I don't think they would have gotten to that point if they had not done that process. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Definitely. Yep.
Okay. So what you see on the screen here are the three questions that I think are really important for you to figure out. And really, when you figure this out, as again, I said, it should be ongoing. But if you've got a business that's going to have high startup costs, for example, like a restaurant, and I've worked with some restaurant businesses, then it's really important to do some customer validation before you start spending money to outfit your new restaurant and rent the building and create the menu and everything. But if you're just a one-person business starting a service business, certainly it can be a lot easier to just kind of do the validation on the fly, start introducing your product and service, and then get feedback as you go. So how much feedback you get before you start, in my opinion, really depends on how much of an investment in time and money you're required to make to start that business. I would not, just decide to open a restaurant without ever speaking to potential customers. You want to get a real understanding. And, and it's not just speaking. Certainly for a restaurant, I would probably also do some food tasting and sampling and all kinds of other things as well. But the point is the amount of effort that you put into this customer validation and when you do it can vary from business to business, depending on what it is that you're launching. I know a lot of people have an amazing idea for some kind of new technology, and they don't want to tell anybody about their product. It's got to be top secret because maybe it's patent pending or you want to protect the idea or something. But in reality, you still need to do that customer validation to see if you're actually solving a problem that people want to have solved. You can certainly ask a lot of questions without revealing the technology and use that to help you with the validation. So we can talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But the idea is that you need to think about your business and how much upfront customer validation that you need to do. Or can you do it kind of like I said, on the fly? Can you just continue to tweak your services or your pricing or your messaging as you go and as you get more feedback from the people that you're working with? And so that can work great for smaller businesses where you can just keep asking questions and try different things and see what resonates with people in terms of your array of services or your pricing or your messaging or your target customers or anything. But what we're trying to understand are those three key questions. So back to that milkshake example, people weren't buying that milkshake for just sheer enjoyment of milkshake. They weren't interested in a variety of flavors or options. It was just a job. And, chocolate and vanilla was just fine. They didn't need to have anything fancy because they were just looking for a way to keep from being hungry and a long drive and keep their hands on the steering wheel. So the more you understand about the goals of your customer, the better you can reach out to them with the right messaging and the right product or service. So, but before you get too far in the process of that, finding and interviewing customers, I do think it's important to do a little bit of background research, or what we call secondary research. So market research, we typically divide into primary and secondary research. So we actually always start with secondary, even though it sounds like it should be second. But secondary just means that the data is out there for another reason, and we're using it for our own goals. So we're using the data secondary to our own purpose. So, and then from there, we can move on to primary research, which is any research that we do ourselves to meet our very specific goals. And those would be things like interviews or surveys. So secondary research is typically a lot of data or information that's available to you that someone had generated for another purpose. Census data, any surveys that someone's done that did for another purpose that maybe has helpful information, things like that. So really any new idea should start with some secondary research validation. Some time ago, it was a while ago, we actually had a client who hired us to help with a business plan for a small engine repair business that he was looking to buy. And he decided that in addition to small engine repair, he was going to expand the business to sell ATVs in the same location. And he was very excited about this process and what he was going to do. So he hired us to help him with it. And I did a little bit of online research and discovered that the brand of ATV that he wanted to sell, they segmented the area, the state, into exclusive dealerships. And there was already an exclusive dealership in his area. And so he wouldn't be able to sell the ATVs at all. And if that was the case, he didn't want to buy the small engine repair business. So as soon as we discovered that, he pulled out of the deal, saved himself a lot of trouble. That was what we learned from that secondary research. So make sure you look around and see what you can find out in secondary research. And what I'll do is just explain some of the different topics that secondary research can really help with. The first is industry. And our goal with industry is the industry that you are in, not the industry that your customers are in. So what we're trying to understand is what's going on in our industry. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is there a ton of competition? Or even worse, are there only one or two competitors that fill almost the whole entire market, in which case it's very hard to break in. So think about are there barriers to entry or one or two key competitors that will make it really hard for you to compete in that market. Where you see the benefit of starting a new process, then is when you know that there are a whole lot of competitors, because that means the market is pretty broad. And if you see a lot of disruption or mergers and acquisitions and crazy stuff going on, then the market is a little bit more open. So the other thing to look at with your industry is what kinds of trends in the economy or in society demographically perhaps might affect your industry. What do you know about who the customers are that industry mainly serves, or who works in that industry in particular? So other things to learn: are you required to have any training or licensing or maintain continuing education or anything like that for your industry? So the more you can learn, the better. And typically what we'll find is that trade associations and industry journals are a great resource. And a lot of trade associations also offer other benefits that can help you. Some trade associations have recommended marketing campaigns. They have specialty or specialized insurance for your particular industry. And a lot of them also offer courses and webinars and education, whether it's required or just to help you grow your own business. So consider looking for a trade association. And I will tell you that there is a trade association for every possible industry that's out there. So for example, I am a member of the Association for Independent Information Professionals, which is an association full of market researchers and copywriters and private detectives and anyone that uses information to help run their business. And it's a relatively small business, solopreneur type thing. There's also a Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals Association, or a Qualitative Research Consultants Association. So there are a ton of different government sources and industry sources that can be really helpful. From the government, another one is the Bureau of Economic Analysis or the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These are reliable government sites that contain information on a variety of industries and can tell you what's growing, what are some of the trends, what's a typical salary for these businesses. So take some time to do a little digging on your own industry and look for some of the things that you see here on the slide. So focus on the size of your industry, any of the trends that are going on in that particular industry, what the expected growth is, who those customers are, and what kind of support you can get from those industry associations or the journals. A lot of them are online, a lot of them are available for free, or there's a certain amount you can get for free, and then there's a higher level for if you join as a member. But it can be both a valuable source of secondary research, but also a valuable support of information and knowledge about your particular industry. So I highly recommend that. So the next is competitors. And here's the thing, every product or service out there has some kind of competition. Some people think they've created something so amazing and unique that there is no competition at all. But in reality, everyone has a limited amount of funds and time. And so what you might be competing against is not someone that has exactly the same product or service you're delivering, but you're competing for that budget money and the time. So think about what those particular issues are. And if you're thinking about how do I solve a problem, think about how a banana competed against a candy bar and a donut and a milkshake, all very different categories. I mean, I guess they're all food, but the idea is if you need to understand your market and who those people are and what they're looking for. So everyone solves these problems in a different way. And what you're trying to figure out is before you launch, how do you position yourself in the best way against the different types of competition that are out there? So some of that competition is direct. And you can say, okay, well, I started a lawn care and landscaping business. So I'm competing directly with other lawn care and landscaping businesses. So go see where they are, go look for them online, see what services they offer, what region they're supporting, see if you can find out any pricing or if they target certain customers. That's your direct competitors. You might also have indirect competitors, and indirect competitors might be someone who does the work themselves, like I'm gonna cut my own grass, or it could be someone that decides to focus on having a rock garden and not have lawn at all or something like that. So think about your direct competitors and your indirect competitors that are solving the same kind of problem. Another thing to consider is a substitute product. So in some cases that can be your competition. So it might not be the same category, but you're competing for the same dollars. So for example, a bowling alley might compete against other bowling alleys, which is a direct competitor, but it's also going to compete against sports bars, movie theaters, or any other business that offers recreation and entertainment. So, and if you look at my business, I specialize in market research. So I'm competing against firms that are huge, like Nielsen, along with specialized firms that only offer one service, like a focus group, or only serve one industry. So I'm competing against small businesses like mine, but really I'm mainly competing against my own potential clients who don't know what they don't know and think that they can find the information that they want themselves to grow their business.
Kelly, that's why I love that job example you sort of kind of teed up at the beginning, is that I think it's really easy for people to only focus on like their direct competitors and not think about it from the job standpoint.
Right, exactly.
Which is key because movie theaters theoretically compete with Netflix, compete with, Broadway shows, other things like that. Well, if you can kind of like lay out all of those,
right,
it can help you really see the landscape a lot better than only focusing on like the specific solution.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's because it's not just watching something on a screen that you're competing against, because you've got a wide variety of ways you can do that. But it's also other sources of entertainment. You've only got so much time and so much money budgeted for family activities. And so you might decide to go to the zoo or do something else with that time instead of see a movie. So you have to think about what problem is it that someone is solving when they choose to go to a movie theater or a bowling alley, and what would make them choose your solution to that problem versus someone else's solution, which could be very different, but it's the same problem. I'm bored, or I'm looking for entertainment or time to spend with my family. So think about your own business. And do you have direct competitors? And you can think about what you do better or worse than those. And then it's also important to think about any indirect competitors or substitutes that help you better understand where you might stand out. In some ways, you might stand out because you're serving a different customer group. Sometimes you might stand out because of some of the features or benefits that your product offers. So it's really important to take a look at all of these potential competitors that you can identify, and then make some comparisons. How do they handle their marketing? Where do they reach out to find customers? Are they mostly on Instagram, or are they on Facebook, or are they in the newspaper, or what are they doing for their advertising and marketing sales? Who are their customers? Are they going after the same target customers as you are, whether it's businesses of a certain size or individuals of a certain age group or income level or whatever? So then you can really try to start to assess, what are your strengths in comparison to these businesses, and what are your weaknesses? And then what are their strengths and their weaknesses, and try to play that up. So, focus on your strengths, consider ways to address your weaknesses if you think that that's going to slow you down. And then you can emphasize your strengths and your competitors' weaknesses as you work on some of that messaging.
So
Kelly, I think Apps has a quick question.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
It feels like how you frame the problem really matters, right? If we're talking about the jobs to be done or the problem that you're solving, that how you frame it matters. And this may not be a good example, but I'm thinking Tesla, right? So Tesla it's transportation, so it's competing with car manufacturers, but it's also about sustainability. So it's reframing the problem of, okay, I just need to get from A to B. I need to commute, to, hey, I want to improve the world, right? I want to do my part. So how you frame the problem that you're solving. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And Tesla is a good example, because they've gone about this in such the opposite way as of most car dealers, car manufacturers, partly in the fact that they don't even want to have dealerships, that you order direct from them. And then, in addition, I just actually saw a cool graphic that was showing how much money the big car manufacturers spend on marketing and how much they spend on research. And Tesla's was flipped. They spent almost all their money was on research and development and a little tiny bit on marketing. And for the others, it was all marketing and just a little bit R&D. And so they've chosen to address a problem in a different way than their competitors. And so they stand out very differently, but they understand that they're not just addressing the problem of transportation, but there's more to it than that. And so the people that they're attracting aren't just looking for any car, they're looking for a car that meets these very specific needs. And so they really emphasize those needs. And those are the people that are attracted to it. So I think it's a great point that understanding the problem that you're solving is a really important part of the process. And it's easy to forget that piece and focus more on how cool your thing is and why everyone should want to buy your product or your service. But you have to turn it around and really put it, onto the customer and think about that customer focus.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So that brings me right to my next slide, which is excellent timing then. So how well can you understand who those target customers are? And so the secondary research is a good starting point for that process. And then the primary research that we'll get to next will help you better understand that. But starting with secondary research, what you're trying to figure out is who are the potential customers that might be interested in my product or service. Before I get going with all these interviews and figuring out who to interview and what to ask, what can I learn that's already out there? What can I learn from the industry sources about who typical customers are? Or if I'm serving a particular geographic location, can I figure out how many customers are out there using census data? So, for example, I worked with a gymnastics center at one point that was opening in a particular geographic region where they felt that there was a need for a gymnastics center. And so in order to, initially we did secondary market research to do some quick feasibility, like, are there enough people for this to be a feasible, business model? And so what we were able to look at is, we looked at the US Gymnastics Association, had all kinds of data on, 75%, which was a high number, but I still remember it. 75% of 2, 3, and 4-year-olds at least try gymnastics. And if you've ever had a 2, 3, or 4-year-old, they have a lot of energy. And so you're always looking for things that they can do to, kind of burn off a little bit of energy. And gymnastics is a great one, all that jumping around and running around and everything. But then by the time the kids get to school age, say 5, then it drops off a smaller number of kids. And then by the age like 7, it's like 75% of them are girls, where it's almost evenly split boys and girls among the toddler or preschool age. So the more you can understand about, the age of these customers and the gender and so forth, and then how far people might be willing to drive and how many years they stick with, the process of staying in gymnastics, then we can start to predict the size of those customer bases. And so we can take the census data and combine it with the US gymnastics data to make a guess. If the census data will tell us how many kids are 2, 3, 4 years old, how many kids are 5, 6, 7, 8, and so then we can start making some guesses. So it's really important to take advantage of that data as much as possible, to try to learn some of the characteristics of your typical ideal customer before you start interviewing them. So you're finding the right people. So typically we start with demographics, especially if you're selling B2C. So are people going to be more likely male or female, or gender doesn't matter at all? Or there's certain age groups that are more likely to be interested, or by income level or education can be another one. Geographic location, if you're not selling it online, or even if you are, you might start with a particular location for your marketing and advertising. Other things to think about, where do your customers get their information? Where do they learn about new things? How do they go about making decisions for this type of purchase? So whatever you can find through secondary research about that ideal customer, whether it's an individual or a business, the better you have a sense for whether this is a good fit before you start doing the customer validation. So, if you're selling B2B, then certainly you want to think about, is your ideal customer an individual business, like a solopreneur, entrepreneur, one-person business? Is it a small business? Is it big business? Is it government work? How do you divide up by that? By industry, are you selling in retail or manufacturing or, wholesale distribution? And then you can also look at the geographic location of your businesses. And oftentimes for B2B, I also look at, because you see this a lot, who is the person who has the problem that needs to be solved, and who's the person that holds the purse strings, because they're not always the same person. With consumers, they typically are the same person, but understanding how decisions get made in your customer's business is an important piece of that as well. So understanding where they get their information, how they make that purchase decision, and how it might be different B2B and B2C. But even B2B, you have to remember you're still buying from people, and that's become even more important in the last several years as we've seen more and more millennials come into businesses, and they would prefer to do a lot of their research and business transactions online versus in person. They're not as inclined to want to have that, sales experience that was more traditional for a lot of B2B businesses. So the more you can understand about the characteristics of those customers through secondary research, the better you can target the right ones to do that research. And then the other piece of research that's tied into all of this then is your market potential. If you've got a description of your target customer and a sense of some ways that you can count them, how many are out there, you want to try and figure out how many of all of these potential customers could potentially be my customers. So, just because there's, 10 million people out there that might want to buy your product, they're not all going to buy your product. There's going to be, there's all those competitors, and there's, budget constraints and so forth. So a lot of this research is used to help with making some projections about sales that can be used for pro formas, but it's also just helping you get a better sense for what's realistic out there. If you know how big your industry is, and so some people say, well, there's in my town, there's 10, Mexican restaurants. And so if I create a Mexican restaurant, then I'll get 1/11 of the business because I'll be the 11th Mexican restaurant. It doesn't work that way, because people don't evenly distribute their decisions on where to go for a Mexican restaurant. So it's important to be realistic about, how you think that's going to work. And just because you're a brand new business doesn't mean you automatically get a brand new slice of that pie and everyone just redistributes themselves to start going to your restaurant. So it's also important to think about, and this is where we start to get into the customer validation part, but when you open your doors, who will your first customer be? And who will be the one after that? And how are you getting in front of those customers? And that's where you want to start to learn about who to talk to get a better sense for whether these people would actually choose to go to your business or not, whether it's a Mexican restaurant or something else. So I know I did one time I worked with a guy who was a plumber, and he had a patented piece of PVC pipe that would go on the top of sewer pipes. And apparently it was, everything somehow was a whole lot easier because it came on and off, and it had some kind of seal on it. It didn't look super fancy, but anybody who saw it thought it was super cool. And so his original plan was, well, I'm just going to establish a relationship with Home Depot and sell millions of these. So, but then we had him look into, using secondary market research, what are the requirements that Home Depot has for you to be a vendor with them? And it had to do with, distribution and how quickly you could get things there, and how many they would want to have in stock, and how they would spread it out, and the amount of insurance you have to have, and how you distribute the product, and where it's being sent to. And it was well beyond his capacity. And so he said, well, you know what, instead, I'm just going to make like 500 of these and stick them in the back of my pickup truck and drive around to the little hardware stores in the town. Well, if that's his plan for, market potential, then we're going to scale down his revenue expectations significantly, because that plan is going to work very differently than the Home Depot plan. So it's important to understand what things look like. What do you think the size of that market is? You can, in some cases, you can do market size by dollars. It's a $10 billion market or whatever, or by the number of customers that you think would buy from you. Some people look at market size also by the number of businesses in that industry. So try to understand what's going on in that market, and then where your potential might be. And that potential has a lot to do with your ability to provide the service to somebody. Like this guy driving in the back of his pickup truck with the pieces of PVC isn't going to sell nearly as much as if he had a different distribution method. So all of that comes into play. And then where it says triangulation, that's really just a technique that we use in secondary market research to try to make a guess at about what's a realistic size for the total market and for the obtainable market that you think that you will be in. And triangulation is a way to look at it from a bunch of different angles and see if you can kind of converge on something that makes sense to you. So you might look at it from the dollar point and from the number of customers or the number of competitors, and come about it from different ways, or look at it from the day one, how many customers do I think I could have, and what's realistic for day two? What's the capacity of my capability, whether it's I can only handle 500 PVC pipes at a time, or my Mexican restaurant only seats 40 people, or that type of thing. So all those pieces come into play when you're looking at market potential. And again, having an understanding of that can help as you start to really focus in on who you're going after for your customers and what they're looking for. So other important components of that, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here. Pricing is a huge topic, very important, but I've run whole workshops on pricing strategy. So some of the key things to consider as far as market research is concerned, wherever you can find out what your customers are pricing their product at, that's helpful, because that can be a good point for people for comparison. And they'll see, are you higher or lower? And sometimes that can be a measure of implied quality. So, buying a bottle of water is a bottle of water, but people will spend a different amount depending on the brand and the location. So the water that I buy in a 12 pack at the grocery store, I expect to be cheaper than the single bottle I buy at the airport, because I need to have water on the plane. So customer comparison, customer feedback that you can get through secondary research when you look in interviews, comment sections, feedback, Amazon reviews, Yelp reviews. People will say this was too expensive, or this wasn't what a great deal this was for this price. Those will give you some idea of what people are looking for. You can also find the expected profit margin for businesses in your industry if you do a little research. So think about all of that to get a sense for where you are for pricing. I will say, though, that it's really important, especially if you offer a service rather than a product, that you price your service based on the value that you're delivering, the problem that you're solving, not on your costs. You shouldn't do that for really anything. I am not a fan of cost plus pricing. I know it's popular, for example, in construction, but for the most part, I think you should think about the value that your product or service delivers and price it there. Yeah, you don't want to be focused only on price. You don't want to become a commodity where the only way that you're being compared is by price. So, if you're starting a new business, you don't want to say, well, I might not be the best life coach, but I'm the cheapest. Not a good selling point. So think about that pricing strategy and what it tells you, and then what it tells your customers. And then finally, before we get into customer validation, let's talk about the concept of a value proposition. This again goes back to what problem are you solving? So what you want to be able to answer is, what job are you completing for your customer? What's the value of that job? And how do you stand out from other people? So think about that for your own business. If you could think about what is the job or the problem that you're addressing for your customers? And what is that worth to them? And how do you do that in a way that stands out from others? So it's really important to have that kind of in your head before you get into the customer validation process. Any questions at this point? All right, well, let's talk a little bit about customer validation then and the actual interview. Yes?
So could you please briefly explain about the TAM, SAM, and SAM?
Mm-hmm. Are you looking for an explanation of the?
Actually, how do we arrive the?
So
the
TAM is the
SAM?
total addressable market. Typically, that's done in revenue, and that is industry information. Would typically have that. Where they'll say, this market by NAICS code or some kind of category is a $10 billion market. That's the TAM. The SAM is the serviceable available market, and that is. Finding the difference between TAM and SAM, it's really like what's realistic for you to be able to service beyond the whole market. And so that could be, if you're only in a particular geographic region, you want to narrow it down by that and try and make some estimates. And then SAM is the serviceable obtainable market. So what percentage of that SAM can realistically be achieved by you? So typically calculating TAM, you can do it in a bottom-up way to find your customers and then see, how many customers are out there that would be those people. And you can do it on top-down by looking at the industry data to see, what's out there. So there's a whole different, all different methods of ways for calculating those different characteristics of your market. But the fact of the matter is, at some point, you're going to have to guess. And that's, I know, I see that as a problem a lot of people struggle with, is that they want to have actual numbers. And even the TAM and the SAM, you're going to find numbers, but everywhere you look, you might find something slightly different. So make sure you're looking at, is this a global number? Is this in North America? Is it the United States? What year is it? Who's making the estimate of what the revenue is? Because they're going to vary. And then what are they measuring? Are we all looking at the same thing? So you do see some variability even in looking at that total market by revenue, because people might categorize things differently. When it comes to your own market, that SAM, I have to say, and Paul, you can chime in here too, but the fact of the matter is it's a guess, because if you don't already have market share, you don't know what you're going to have. And so you're trying to make a guess. And just because you guess that you're going to capture this much of the market doesn't mean you'll capture it on day one. It will take you time. That's like the potential market that you have to sell to. So Paul, do you want to chime in there at all?
Yeah, that's why I thought your point on triangulation was like perfect, and that like people I think can look at the TAM, SAM, SOM, right? And it doesn't include a bottoms up where you're actually taking, here's how many units I'm going to sell on day one. Here's how many units I'm going to sell on day 365, you know, in year 5, whatever. Here's the price I'm going to charge. And you can start to like kind of do that math along with the TAM, SAM, SUM, and then look at comparable products, right? Are there products that are solving a similar job and what their kind of, you know, glide path has been, which is why I think that like that triangulation advice is perfect for any market sizing. So.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is you take as much data as you can, and then you guess. And so we have to be a little bit comfortable with uncertainty, because if it's something new, you just don't know. And then as you start selling, those guesses, you can fill in actual data, and then, you know, the guesses become a little bit more educated over time. So, but you have to kind of just embrace uncertainty to a certain extent when you're getting started. So, and so that guides us to our, you know, talking about embracing uncertainty, hypothesis testing. So based on all the research that you can do, the secondary research, creation of your value proposition, understanding of the size of your market, all that stuff, what you really want to do is be able to make this statement. My product or service solves this problem or creates this value for these customers. So what is the problem that's being solved, or the value that you're creating? Who exactly are your customers? They're not anyone and everyone. The secondary research should have helped you really focus in on who your ideal customers are. The customer validation will help to confirm that. And then what is the current solution to this problem? Even if you're offering something brand new, people are solving this problem right now in a different way. So think about how you would complete this statement for your business. And that is the starting point for your customer validation. That's what you're trying to validate, is this statement. You think there's a problem that you're solving with your product. So the next step is, do your customers agree that, first of all, this is a problem, and second of all, that what you're offering is a solution that they value? So that's what we want to get into with some customer validation. So the first part of that is who to interview. And so finding the right people is just as important as asking the right questions, or maybe more important. So I think that goes back to the title. Don't ask your mom, because your mom will say, I love your idea, it's wonderful. Don't ask your spouse or your partner or your best friends. But that can be challenging for a lot of people, because you don't know who to ask, or you want to ask people that you don't have connections with. So I will say it's okay to start with people that you do know, and then follow, it's called snowball sampling. And so snowball sampling is just to ask one person, you know, do some customer validation with one person and say, well, do you know anyone else in this industry or in this market? Can you introduce me to somebody? And then ask them, do they know somebody else? And so the idea is that's a snowball effect, like a rolling snowball that gets bigger. So start with who you know, and then keep asking. Sometimes it's easy to find those potential customers. If you know exactly what you're looking for, you can reach out on social media or in other ways to find out who you're looking for. But what we're trying to do with customer validation is not survey them, but what we're trying to do is interview them, because we want to have two-way communication. We don't want to have a flat conversation where they just post an answer on social media or answer a survey. It's more important that the conversation is two-way. And so it's easier to do that if you can actually get in front of some of these people. And so starting with people you know, people that might be customers of your potential competitors, existing customers if you have some, and then just keep asking, do you know anyone like this? Can I talk to someone else like this? This is a hard thing to do for anyone, because we don't want to inconvenience people. We don't want to, you know, cause trouble, but it's really important to find these people. You might be able to find them on LinkedIn and then reach out and just be clear. You tell them, this is purely for research. This is not a sales call. I need 5 minutes of your time because I'm doing research. And people might be more inclined to answer if that's the case. But start thinking about who it is that you want to interview. Who are those ideal customers? Because you don't want to ask your friends or someone that you happen to know that does not fit your target audience, because you're not actually validating anything then. So what I want to do now is kind of give you an example of a case, and so that we can look at customer validation with this example and get a sense for what works and what doesn't work. So This is a business that I have worked with. And so we'll call the business the Startup Banker. And this is a woman who was a former commercial banker who felt that a lot of small businesses did not get commercial loans because the bankers felt it was too much trouble to go through the financials of these small businesses. And so she is working with them as a consultant to help them put together a beautiful package for the loans to take to the bank that has all the information the bank needs and makes it easier for them to make a loan decision. So she's, working on validating that idea, or she was working on validating this idea and reaching out to entrepreneurs, existing and aspiring entrepreneurs, to do some customer validation. So if we look at this example, here are 4 questions that she could ask of potential customers to get some information. So let's look at each one of these questions and see what we think about them. So question number 1 is just that direct validation. For my business, I help startups put together their financial reports to make it easier for them to get a loan. Would you be interested in this service? Question 2 is one she had considered. Maybe people would also want to get some coaching to help them keep moving. So is that something you want to do? And then question 3 is her trying to get an idea for what's really important to these people. Is it getting a low rate? Is it getting, just knowing you'll get accepted or avoid getting denied? Is it understanding the process? And then question number 4 is trying to get to some pricing. So these were the initial questions. And so let's take a look one question at a time. So if you look at question number 1, this is what I do. Would you be interested? So that's the first question. And I would argue that this is not a good question because you've revealed what you're doing. And when you do that, people tend to want to be supportive. And because of that, they are more likely to say, yes, I do think that this is, I would be interested in this service, because they think they're just trying to be nice. So instead of being very specific about what you do, you want to try to be more vague. So this is a revised version of that question. What are some things that concern you most as you work to get your business going? And how do you address those concerns? Now, no one knows what your business is, and they're not just going to agree to be nice. What you're trying to get to here is, what are the things that really worry them? Because first of all, it might not be the loan packaging that is their top worry. And that's an important thing to know. And if you just say, this is what I do you like that idea? It's hard to say no, people are just too nice. But what if no one mentions financials or a loan at all? Or what if they mention other things that she hadn't thought of that she could add as additional services or pivot to offer differently? So the idea is to be problem focused, not solution focused.
And I also like too about how you revised it, Kelly, is the first question was like a yes or no question.
Yeah.
Versus this one's much more open-ended. Is that something you encourage?
Yes. Yeah. As much as possible, I encourage open-ended questions. You don't want a yes or no. You want them to have to answer some things. You want them to talk and you to listen. So that's why that question got changed the way it was. Same thing with question number 2. If you see it the way it is now, if I also offered this, would you be interested, and how often would you be interested in it? So this fixed version, tell me about a time that you hired someone to help you with something. How did you make that decision? It doesn't get to the coaching specifically, but it gets to how do you look for help, and what kind of help are you looking for? Are you looking for ongoing help? Are you looking for a single problem to be solved? And that can help you get a sense for whether that coaching would be helpful or not. But one important thing to understand is that it's more important to ask about things you've done before than it is to ask about what you might do in the future. We all think we're going to be way better in the future than we are currently. So it's better to ask about past experiences where people can just tell you, this is what I did, instead of saying, I think I'm going to do this. So like I might tell you, I'm a healthy eater and I eat lots of vegetables all the time. And so I would love to go someplace where they serve vegetables all the time. But if you say, well, what did you have for dinner last night? Say, well, I had a hamburger and some French fries. Okay, what did you have for dinner the night before? Well, if I haven't had vegetables in several days, then, my aspiration of being a better vegetable eater is different than my actual behavior as not a great vegetable eater. So think about asking about how you've handled past situations rather than asking about how you might handle a current situation or a future situation. Question number 3 you can see we're asking to get some prioritization here, but really we're trying to be as open-ended as possible at this stage. That's a great survey question for existing customers to get more information on customer satisfaction or customer prioritization. But right now we're just trying to get as open-ended as possible without missing anything by itemizing certain topics. So instead, this fixed question is, what are some of the things that worry you when you seek a loan from a bank? Then let them talk, and they might come up with way more things than you had put in those multiple choice options. And then finally, question number 4, if you say, would you pay $5,000 for this service? Well, or 500, what if they would pay 1,000? Or what if they won't pay more than 50? Pricing is really difficult to get to in this type of situation, and it's hard to ask a clear price point question like this. So this is another way to ask it, which is way more indirect. Would it be helpful to have someone help you with your financial statements? Why or not? Why not? Here, what we're trying to get at is the value that you're offering, not what price point they would pay for. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is focus in on that value to set the pricing. So as I said, pricing, you could do a whole workshop on pricing. It's a whole psychological, process in a lot of ways. But what you're trying to get to here is how important is this to people? Do they really rely on it? And then you can from there do a little bit more exploring on, but asking people directly about what they might pay isn't going to get you any valid information at all. So really what I've got here then is I'm just kind of summing things up with some do's and don'ts for your customer validation. And these you can see in the questions from the example we just looked at. Make sure you're focusing on their problem, not on your solution. Open-ended questions as much as possible. Take a lot of notes, ask the same questions. So over and over again, just keep asking the same questions because you want to make sure you've got some consistency in the responses. And you might have, secondary questions like, follow-up questions, which is fine, but make sure the core questions remain the same of everyone you interview so you can see some consistency across the responses. But make sure you're really focusing in on listening to them and not hearing just what you want to hear. This is why a lot of people don't like to do customer validation, because they don't like to find out that their idea isn't as awesome as they and their mother thought that it was. But this is where it's so important, because what you can do is learn from what you're hearing and perhaps pivot, offer additional services or change it around or do something different than you might have done had you not gone through this process. So some things that you should not do, as I mentioned, don't tell them your solution. Ask them more about the problem and what kind of problem it is. Don't ask about what their future plans are. Ask about what they've done in the past. So avoid intent. Don't get too bogged down in the details. This is initial informational, information gathering. We're not trying to create a giant survey with scales and numbers and graphs and charts. We're just trying to capture as much information as possible. So open-ended questions and no multiple choice questions. Don't try to sell anything. Don't say, well, when I do start this business, can I have your name to, get out in front of you later? You don't want them to have any sense that this is a sales call. It's a pure research. So those are the goals. Some great question starters are what you see here on the slide. I like the, tell me about a time when you had this problem. How did you address this problem? And then if you're trying to get to frequency, how often might somebody use something? Again, ask about past behavior, not future behavior. And then I like question 3 too, because you're trying to get at a problem. So what frustrates you about the loan process? What worries you about the loan process? Or tell me about a time when you were, trying to solve a particular problem. These are questions that are open-ended, that encourage people to talk, that have them focus on their problem, their concern, and then you can, from that, kind of interpret how your solution, whether that solution really does the trick. So that's what I've got. I will open things up to questions. And I don't know, I'm trying what our timeline is here, Paul, but
yeah, anybody have any questions? I've got one, but I'd love to open it up to everybody else first.
Okay.
Hi.
Hey, Kim, you got a question?
Hi. I don't have a question. I just have a quick comment. I'm using my lunch and I have to jump off of here because I'm exhausted my hour. But I just want to say thank you. So I am in the process of doing research. Well, we were trying to get ready to start an event center, and we reached out to HCDC Pigford, Bob Pigford, I think is who we met with.
Yep.
And so he said, start checking for events. And so I just want to say thank you. This was great. So
Good.
did I learn all this when I went to do my MBA? Yes, but I was just getting my MBA to get the degree, not to actually start a business, years later. So I'll definitely be following more, especially you, Miss Berry. I saw all the different things you do. I just want to say thank you. I took probably about 4 pages worth of notes. So I'll definitely be jumping back into some of the different seminar and webinars that are offered. So thank you all very much.
Great, thanks.
Okay, you all have a good day.
So, Kelly, this is Apps again. Just thinking through, we use Agile Scrum, and part of that process, we bring customers and prospects into our sprint review meetings, and so we have them give us feedback on new releases in our software, but then we also are trying to get them to give us input and feedback on ideas and roadmap. So it kind of to your point on it requires, you should do it two times, do customer validation 2 times at the beginning and throughout your entire existence of your company. I love that idea. Is there any, in that context of doing it within the Agile process, are there any tips or suggestions, or have you seen any best practices on how people apply that customer validation to that product development life cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really varies, I think, from industry to industry, what people are looking for. The challenge can be if you have 2 goals at the same time. One is to actually, continue the process of working together, and one is to get more validation. They might not always be aligned, but certainly any interaction you have with customers can be a form of validation. And so it's certainly worth trying to understand what their issues and concerns are. I would say as you've got existing customers, it can become a valid thing to actually survey them and get some customer validation or satisfaction levels through a survey. But any conversations with them can be beneficial. So I'm not sure if I'm getting right at what your goals are with the Agile component of it.
Yes. So I guess just in general, I was trying to apply these concepts, which I really appreciate and love, to what we're doing kind of pragmatically, like on a day-to-day basis, with our current customers and future customers. So, okay, thank you.
Sure.
I mean, one thing I've seen is kind of a combination of both exploration interview based and then use based exploration, if that makes sense, right? So like where you, at the end of the day, like it fits in with what Kelly was saying, is that, hey, what's the hypothesis you're trying to validate? And maybe in the front end, there might be more exploratory questions that are getting in a space, understand the key value. But when there's actually almost like concept testing, like prototype testing, like things that have features that you want people to leverage and use, it feels as if it's going to get more specific, right? As to like, from an ethnographic standpoint, is that something that you would agree with, Kelly?
Yeah.
Like one's more like front end, like, hey, where is their value? But then when I've got like, hey, now I want you to go and like solve this specific problem with my software or with my product, right? Like there's probably going to be some level of like trial-based, usage there with similar open-ended questions though, right?
Yeah, I think open-ended questions are always valuable. There can be value in the survey type questions that are with a Likert score and everything, because everyone likes to be able to do some analysis and show cool charts and graphs. So, so it really has to do with whether your goal is more exploratory information or more descriptive, quantitative information. Both are valuable. It's just a matter of what your goals are. And certainly I think with the initial customer validation that you're doing at the beginning, part of what you're doing is validating, are these people my customers? And then, you know, am I finding the right people? And then am I solving the right problem? If you've already got these customers, then you might be doing a different type of exploring, which is more like, what do they like and not like about my product? And what are some potential ways to grow the business? But you don't want to ask them those questions directly. You know, you want to, you know, again, focus on the problem and what's working and what's not working. And, you know, that can kind of help you. So you're not validating your customers so much as you're validating, you know, potential growth for your business based on what your customers are telling you.
Quick question I've got is on the open-ended avoiding the solution component, right? I've seen that as a very difficult space for people to kind of navigate.
Yeah.
That, you know, you'll be talking about a space and you'll just naturally presume a solution and provide too much context relative to like the solution. I mean, what would be where do you see companies or people kind of like trip up on this as they're going out to like start to interview and do their own customer validation?
Yeah, I mean, it can be so easy because you've got the solution in your head. It's hard to not reveal it to people. And it's not a matter of being top secret. It's just a matter of making sure you're not feeding them the information so that they just tell you what you want to hear. So really, if you think about some of those starting statements that I had put up there, you know, what frustrates you about this, or tell me about a time when you had this problem or situation. You know, sometimes they'll talk and they won't say anything that matches what you were trying to do. And then the question is, are you solving the wrong problem, or are you asking the wrong people, or is there just not anything out there? And that's why it's important to talk to as many people as you can, or maybe talk to different people than you were originally targeting, or ask different questions. Because that's what you're trying to figure out is, if no one brings up my solution, is that because they're not interested, or it's so unique and, you know, original, no one's ever thought of it. And so a lot of people will ultimately at the end of this process say, so if I were to introduce something like this, would you be interested? And so that can, you know, some people would say that could taint the information. But if you started out with the original process of trying to get to what all their problems and concerns were, you know, certainly if at the end you get a little bit more specific because they haven't ever gotten there, that can help. And, you know, in some ways, I think it helps to also not identify yourself as the owner of this particular business, but kind of just imply that you're doing some research, you know, on behalf of a business. So they don't worry about hurting your feelings if they say they don't like it. I mean, you don't have to lie to anybody, but just don't, you know, be so super forthcoming with, hey, I'm a, you know, entrepreneur and I have this amazing idea and I'm looking, you know, to get feedback on it. And then, you know, at the end saying, well, this is my idea. What do you think of it? No one's going to say, well, I hate your idea because that you just said that you're so excited about it. So, you know, saying I'm doing some research, you know, and then just don't identify who you are. And I'm just trying to understand, you know, the things that problems and concerns that people like you have to do with this particular situation. And if they just don't get to it, then you might want to be more specific.
Got it.
Does that help? It's not an easy process, but it's an important one. And I think because it's hard to find the people and ask the right questions, and also hard to, you know, not get positive feedback all the time. A lot of people just choose to skip this process, and that's where you run into trouble.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, if it's a small business or you're already in business and you're exploring new things, you know, you can kind of just learn as you go. Start trying to sell and get the feedback and see what happens versus, you know, something that requires a huge upfront investment. It's probably better to do that validation before.
It's like Rohit, I don't know if you had a question. You came off mute.
Yeah, no, I was just come here, so nothing as yet. So thanks.
Okay, got it. Great. Unless anyone has any other further questions, just wanted to say thanks to Kelly for your time today, and
My pleasure.
appreciate the insights you bring, and love how you started with the secondary market research first, because I really think that it helps you. That process can seem like a lot, but I really feel like it's critical because it helps you get down to and hone in on things that you would then want to really make sure you have a lot of uncertainty on, that you can then go and like double click on in the actual validation process.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I also liked how you had the examples of the interview questions. So I think that helps as good starters for people.
Yeah.
And for those that are on the line, we've got her deck, and I'm happy to send it out after the meeting.
Hey, Paul, can I ask
Yep.
you one more question? Do we have 2 more minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Kelly, we're in the process of kind of working on our go-to-market strategy, and part of that is identifying customer personas and problems that each persona has, and then how we address those problems. So we've got this little matrix we're working on with regard to that customer discovery process. Do you see people typically, going by role in the buyer journey or the buyer center's journey and the buying center journey, and identify problem, solution? Is that what you typically see people do, or are you seeing it at more of an organizational level? How do you see that executed?
So you're saying like for each persona that you're identifying the problem and the solution?
Yeah, so we're looking at the entire buying center for a customer.
Right,
We work with
right.
hospitals and saying, okay, how many people are involved in the buying process, and understanding what their problems are that they're struggling with, understanding what potential objections that they may have with us or our solution, and then what's our value prop for each one of those individuals.
Right. Yeah, and I think that sounds perfect, because each situation might be a little bit different. And when you're talking B2B, and certainly in a hospital too, I've worked with clients where that's the challenge, because the purchasing agent is not the same person that's using the service or the product. And that can be a real challenge, because you're not sure who influences whom. And it might be different from one hospital to another, but certainly understanding the method by which they make their financing. I actually worked with a client that ended up changing the way their product was sold, so that it was sold in pieces that all fell underneath the threshold by which they would need multiple signatures. So understanding how that works is really important, and then who to reach out to, who's the one that's being influenced, or is the influencer, what does the budget process look like? All those things are so important to understand, because you might even get all the doctors on board or engineers on board or whomever, but then you also have to sell it in a different way to the finance people. And so the messaging is a little different for finance versus the user. So I'm not sure if that's totally addressing your question, but I think the idea is that during that purchase, the buyer's journey, there's multiple people that are in that journey, and they're going to have different problems and solutions, meaning that the finance people care more about budget and timing of it, and capital expenses versus ongoing expenses and where everything fits, where the person that's actually going to be your user cares more about the solution from your product perspective.
Right, yeah. So it sounds like what we're doing is in line with what you'd recommend.
Yeah, I think so, from what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Okay. That's it, Paul. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.